Good afternoon, everybody. Well, finally, here we go. We're going to go through the Global Compact on Refugees. Now, I only got to page 17, but by the time I got to page 17, I just thought, like, I can't do any better than where I'm at. So this is part one, and if there's a whole lot more after page 17, then we'll do that. This is going to be a big video, so if I start to get off track and then I pause it and come back, give me some leeway. I don't want to get half an hour in and then have to restart because I bungle something or something to that effect. Okay, so I've broken it down into a couple of sections. We're going to look at this through the lens of cost. We're going to look at this through the lens of sovereignty. We're going to look at this through the lens of population, because there's an article I want to show you about that, which I'm sure you've probably seen. We're going to look at this through the lens of safety. And I've gone through this and kind of highlighted some stuff. I've got news articles to show you, and I'm trying to, I'm going to give you my opinion because I think this is dangerous. I think the UN is dangerous. I think that this whole idea is a terrible idea. I think it's awful. I think it aids in human trafficking. I think it minimizes the importance of borders, and borders are very, very important, man. Good fences make great neighbors is a saying I remember my dad saying when I was young, and it's important. Like it is something that is you have to be respectful of each other's differences. You can say, "Hey, howdy, neighbor," no problems, but when you start saying, "How come your woman's head's uncovered?" there is a problem, and that's happening right now in Canada. So, and that is, if we look at the European migration model, that's what's coming here. And look at London, look at Paris, look at France, and we are going to look at those things because those things are relevant here in this conversation, in this context. So there is one other piece to this. And we'll get there, I suppose, because I'm going to scroll through it. But this draft also references the United Nations resolution. The New York Declaration on for Refugees and Migrants. Okay, so this is a 24-page document in and of itself, and I did start going through and highlighting it. But man, it's like it deserves its own video all by itself. And this was adopted a few years ago, but we're already seeing examples of what this looks like in real life. So this was signed by the UN, I suppose, in October 2016. And so Mr. Trudeau was the prime minister at the time. And so now we're seeing the next, I guess, logical step according to the UN. So let's look at this according to cost, starting with the introduction. What is this? Well, this is the Global Compact on Refugees, the final draft, June 26, 2018. So it's taken me a while to get to this. It's October. Anyway, introduction, background. The predicament of refugees is a common concern of humankind. Refugee situations have increased in scope, scale, and complexity, and refugees require protection, assistance, and solutions. Millions of refugees live in protracted situations, often in low and middle income countries, facing their own economic and developmental challenges. And the average length of stay has continued to grow. Despite tremendous generosity of host countries and donors, including unprecedented levels of humanitarian funding, the gap between needs and of the burden and responsibility for hosting and supporting the world's refugees while taking account of existing contributions and the differing capacities and resources among states, refugees, and host communities should not be left behind. So that's a really long way of saying it's real expensive, yo. And every single time I highlight yellow here, this is when we're looking at cost. We're going to get back to the sovereignty. The blue is sovereignty, except for number 5. I want to point out that it says this here early because I think it's hilariously funny. Okay, so it says number 5, paragraph 5. So this is laid out in paragraphs. So I just read you paragraph 1, and I'm going to get back to paragraph 1 in just a minute. But it says in paragraph 5 here that the goal of the Global Compact is entirely non-political in nature, including in its implementation, and is in line with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. I'm going to point out every time it asks member states to be political. Here's the first one, and I just think it's so fun. I'm going to point it out because I think it's hilarious. Like, they wait no time at all. We're not political at all. However, the Global Compact will seek to achieve these 4 interlinked independent objectives through mobilization of political will. So, I mean, we're non-political, but we are going to use politics in order to do what... We're non-political, though. We're definitely non-political. So long as everybody agrees with us, we can all get along. Why don't you agree with me, you Nazi? Right? Okay, that's where we're going. But let's get back to paragraph 1. It's real expensive, is what it's saying. All of these refugee situations are a big burden. And as we go through this document, that is going to be a recurring theme, okay? But first, let's hear what Donald Trump has to say, and I'm going to read this out. But this is a Washington Post article, and I remember watching this whole speech, and I thought it was fantastic, well worth the time. But in it, Trump says you can help 10 refugees for the cost of bringing one refugee to the United States. So we can help 10 in their home country, in their home region, for the cost of one coming to the U.S. And let's hear Donald Trump say it.
The United States
let's actually hear him.
is a compassionate
Oops, sorry, I forgot.
nation and has spent billions and billions of dollars in helping to support this effort. We seek an approach to refugee resettlement that is designed to help these horribly treated people and which enables their eventual return to their home countries to be part of the rebuilding process. For the cost of resettling one refugee in the United States, we can assist more than 10 in their home region.
And it's funny.
This is a go.
Sorry. And it's funny, if you watch the whole speech, he kind of talks about it a lot. Okay, so I've used this article before. I'm going to read more of this article because they make their case at the beginning that it is expensive to host refugees, and then they try and destroy it by saying no, actually the case that we've just made is dwarfed by this number, haha. And I mean, it's quite funny, really. So here we go. Here's the Washington Post article. Quote, for the cost of resettling one refugee in the United States, we can assist more than 10 in their home region. That's President Trump. In arguing for keeping refugees close to their home nations rather than resettling them in other countries, the president offered an arresting statistic. He gave a very specific figure that 10 refugees overseas could be helped for the cost of settling one in the United States. How did he calculate this? And is this calculation valid? The facts. The White House says the president's estimate came from a 2015 report, linked in the article, by the Center for Immigration Studies, a research organization in favor of lower immigration levels. The report, titled The High Cost of Resettling Middle Eastern Refugees, concluded that the first 5 years in the United States, each refugee cost taxpayers $64,370, or 12 times what the United Nations estimated it needed to care for refugees over the 5 years. On an annual basis, refugees cost $12,874 a year, the report estimated. The report based its estimate on a variety of data sources, calculating how refugees used services such as Medicaid, food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, and the like. About a quarter of the figures reflected the cost of public education for the children in refugee families. I want to say that again. About 1/4 of the figure reflected the cost of public education for the children in refugee families. That comes up later. And that's a huge percentage. So educating children is very expensive. It costs money for facilities. It costs money for teachers, especially if you are trying to integrate people who are different, speaking a different language, coming from a different culture. It's expensive, very, very expensive. Okay, back to the article. The report acknowledges that refugees pay, quote, something in taxes, but said the data was relatively sparse for the first 5 years in the country, so it did not look at the revenue side of the ledger. Though the research is extensive, we often warn residents to be wary of reports by groups with a particular agenda. It's striking that even at this stage in his presidency, whatever about Trump. Sorry, I highlighted that accidentally. Okay. As it turned out, the Department of Health and Human Services in July had drafted a 52-page report that attempted to assess the cost of refugees in response to a presidential order in March for the State Department and other agencies to tally the cost of helping refugees in the United States. The report is comprehensive, with a review of the literature on the subject that included an examination of the CIS report. The HHS, the Health and Human Services, report is open about the shortcomings in data and uncertainties in the estimates. Okay, but as the New York Times reported, the White House killed the draft HHS report, which attempts to tally the costs and benefits. The Times later published the squelched report on its website. HHS looked at a 10-year cost for all refugees, not just from the Middle East, and came up with a figure of nearly $7,134 a year. That's just over half the estimate by the CIS. But then the HHS took it one step further and estimated the taxes paid by refugees, including payroll taxes, income taxes, property taxes, sale taxes, and the like. The net fiscal impact was $63 billion over 10 years, the agency said. In other words, over time, the taxes paid by refugees easily exceeded the cost to taxpayers. That was too much for the White House, which rejected the analysis. Instead, the agency was ordered to send just a 3-page report to the State Department, which is still working on the refugee cost memo for Trump that only looks at costs. It concluded that the annual per capita expenditure for refugees was $3,346, compared with $2,501 for the general U.S. population. One could argue that a more relevant comparison would be between refugees and low-income Americans on assistance, not all Americans. So, those poor people are more like refugees than other Americans. What? Like, what insanity? But the point of this is they're saying that, no, Trump is wrong. It is actually very, very fiscally beneficial to have these refugees. $63 billion over 10 years. That's a lot of money. That's not peanuts. Okay, to put it in perspective, our budget, our Ontario. When I say our, I mean Ontario. So it was $150 billion. That was our debt 15 years ago when the Liberals took over, and since then, they've increased it by $150 billion. We're at about $301 billion in debt right now, right? So $63 billion is nothing to sneeze at. That's operating as a liberal for like 5 years, right? 6 years, 4 years, if you're truly a liberal, and it's somebody else's money, right? So their point is, this whole article is a takedown of Trump and his silly, old-fashioned ways of helping people in the culture that they live in their home region. And, isn't he silly? Don't we want that $63 billion, man? That's a ton of money, right? That's the whole point of this article. Link will be in the description if you're interested in reading it. But this is a recurring theme. Like, this isn't just this article. If you ask Google, are refugees an economic burden or opportunity? Well, it definitely wants you to think opportunity. And sorry, that was Chevy Chase from, never mind. That's staying in. But the point is, if you ask the Google machine, it wants you to believe something too. It's skewing things, because this whole report, and we're gonna continue looking at it, is telling us how expensive this is. So let's continue looking at the yellow highlighted words. So that was cost. They're lying. It can't have it both ways. It's either an economic benefit, and if it's an economic benefit, then why aren't the frontline nations lining up to say, yeah, man, we want that. We're going to invest in our future with these refugees. We're going to put all sorts of money because we want that economic benefit. If that was true, if what they're trying to sell us here is true, then people, and by people I mean like the people who live and control the government of countries, would be clamoring for all of those benefits, especially if they're like people, culturally similar, right? If it was beneficial to have Americans coming to Canada to hang out in our tech sector, we would do things to encourage it, right? We would have programs for people who are currently studying tech-based things and say, come to Canada, we want you here. That's how this works, right? That's not happening. These people aren't. That's not what's happening. They're not compatible. And we're going to get to who these people are very, very soon. But it is very interesting, the spin and the reality. But back to cost, they want you to think, if you're in a Western country, it is a huge benefit to have refugees coming in. Huge benefit. The only way your economy is going to continue rolling is if you have refugees and immigrants. Man, open all them borders. That's the only way you're going to have. That's the only way you're going to have growth, right, Canada? Where is it? Canada's population needs to be 100 million by 2100. It's a crazy, crazy thing to want. But this is what is being pushed. So let's get back to the accord here. Number 7 is, what are the goals of the compact? The goals of the compact as a whole are to 1, ease the pressure on host countries. Number 2, enhance the refugee self-reliance. Number 3, expand access to third country solutions. And 4, support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. Okay, number 1, well, I wanted to get everybody on the same page here. That's what the point of this whole thing is. So the purpose is to help refugees. There's no denying that. And sure, if people who are refugees are well defined, and we're going to get to why other countries have problems with it. We're going to talk about sovereignty in a minute after I get through cost. And the sovereignty conversation is really important to have. But figuring out what this whole thing is trying to fix is important to understanding the document. So I wanted you guys to understand that. Also, this paragraph is referenced a lot. And it's part of how it's not how they make things hard to read, but these things are hard to read because of how they're written, right? And I don't know if that's on purpose or just a byproduct of the Western legal jargon, etc. So, okay, we're going to continue on cost. So like I said, each one of these is called a paragraph, and each paragraph is part of the agreement. And so when we sign on to it, we're agreeing to all these paragraphs, okay? So my question is, how much do these things cost? How do we find out how much these things cost? How much are we signing up for here? So paragraph 15 says, quote, the following arrangements seek to achieve more equitable and predictable burden and responsibility sharing with host countries and communities, and to support the search for solutions, including where appropriate through assistance to countries of origin. They entail complementary action at the global and regional or country-specific levels. So it's very dense wording, and it has absolutely no metrics. Right? How much is any of that going to cost? Global, regional, country-specific actions and all this other stuff. There's no metrics. What are the success metrics? Is there ever a success, or is it just an endless churn of money? Because it's you can't define it. The problem is solved when X never happens. So there's always this constant, 4 or 5 people meeting to talk about how to move people who are displaced. And yeah, that's a problem. But if borders are closed, and we get to this in safety, if borders are closed, then people need to figure it out in their own country rather than risking their lives or giving money to human trafficking organizations and gangs to get to the, quote, better life that these same gangs are using to get jihadi fighters into foreign countries. Like, it's insanity. It is absolutely insanity. And this document touches on that too, and we'll get to that in safety. But like I said, this thing is so huge that, and I apologize for going off on tangents, but it's giant. It's so big. So, okay, so 15 is giving us lots of unspecified things that we have to pay for. 17, paragraph 17 is talking about a periodic global refugee forum. So yet another thing, everybody has to meet every couple of years to talk about what we're going to do with everybody. So again, like, this is more churn money, more, we're so broke, we need more money. It's never enough. It's never enough if you're the UN. And I think I did a video about that. It's never enough. It's never, ever, ever enough. Okay, back to the paragraph 17. So, a periodic global refugee forum at ministerial level will be convened for all United Nations member states, together with the relevant stakeholders, to announce concrete pledges and contributions toward the objectives of the Global Compact as set out in paragraph 7. So if you want to go back to paragraph 7, that's the what is the whole thing about, and that's easing pressure on host countries, enhancing refugees' self-reliance, expanding access to third country solutions, and support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity, right? So that's what they're referencing there. So that's what I mean. It's hard to read, right? And to consider opportunities, challenges, and ways to burden and responsibility share can be enhanced. The first forum will be convened in 2019. Subsequent forums will be convened every 4 years unless otherwise agreed by the General Assembly. So more churn. Right? More churn. Paragraph 19 says the first global refugee forum in 2019 will be dedicated to receiving formal pledges and contributions. Subsequent forums will provide an opportunity not only to make new pledges, but for states and relevant stakeholders to take stock of the implementation of their previous pledges and progress towards the achievement. So everybody will meet 4 years, pat themselves on the back and say, hey, that refugee crisis that happened last year? We did great. High five, maybe lay down on somebody's office floor, with an ice pack on their head. Ugh. Phil, what a rough day. Buddy, you okay? Laying down on the ground? That's a little weird, man. That doesn't happen in big boy offices, Phil. No, Miss Freeland did it. Oh, okay. Paragraph 23 says the support platform would enable context-specific support for refugees and concerned host countries and communities in a spirit of partnership and in line with host country ownership and leadership. Its functions would include, here's another little mention of galvanizing political commitment and advocacy for prevention, protection, response, and solutions. So we are non-political. This whole thing is going to be non-political, but we are going to use our position with the UN to galvanize political commitment and advocacy for prevention, protection, response, and solutions. So that's one of their things. Again, completely ignoring the previous statement in their support platform. Okay, mobilizing. So that was one bullet. Mobilizing financial, material, and technical assistance, as well as resettlement and complementary pathways for admission in support of the comprehensive plan. Paragraph 21. Right, that's the one we just read. Oh, we didn't actually read it. Sorry, but it just references a comprehensive plan. Have a plan, guys. Where applicable, drawing on global refugee forum pledges. So the pledges we made earlier, those are going to be used up in this area. So basically, we're pledging money to then be auctioned off for those who maybe need it, but maybe not. Maybe they're just using the global compact on refugees as this is better than where I'm at. And if Canada's willing to give me $30,000 a year to sit in a hotel in Toronto, yeah, I guess I can get a plane ticket somewhere. Huh? Right? And then the last bullet says supporting comprehensive policy initiatives to ease pressure on host countries, build resilience and self-reliance, and find solutions. So I wonder how much, ballpark, a year finding solutions would cost. You know, just like if I told my boss, I'm just going to be researching for the next 6 months. Unless it was for a really big story. And I mean, I am my own boss. I would just be like, dude, 6 months is too long. The whole audience is going to go. So I just asked my boss, and he said 6 months is way too long. So it's these soft words around cost, and all of these things cost, are very problematic because it's going to cost a lot of money when they're trying to shove this down our throats that it costs nothing. Look at Trump, the idiot. He thinks that it's going to cost money. He's throwing away $63 billion. Moron. Right? No. Oh, Google. You're totally right. Yeah, it's a benefit, not a burden. Except this whole document has spent the whole time saying it costs a lot of money to do anything with refugees. A whole lot of money. A quarter of the cost was taken up by educating children, and that's not free. Right? Okay, so now we're entering section 3, key tools for affecting burden and responsibility sharing. So this is the whole section that says really, really expensive. So paragraph 32 says, while contributions to burden and responsibility sharing by the international community as a whole go beyond funding, the mobilization of timely, predictable, adequate, and sustainable public and private funding, nonetheless, is key to the successful implementation of the Global Compact, bearing in mind the interest of all relevant stakeholders and maximizing the effective and efficient use of resources, preventing fraud, and ensuring transparency. And if the transparency they're talking about is the transparency that the liberal Trudeau government has shown, then I don't want any of it because it's absolute lies and garbage. Back to the article, or back to the compact. Through the arrangements set out above and other related channels, resources will be made available to countries faced with large-scale refugee situations relative to their capacity, both new and protracted, including through efforts to expand the support base beyond traditional donors. And there's a bunch of bullet points again, but it says development cooperation. This will involve additional development resources over and above the regular development assistance provided as grants or with high degree of concessionality through both bilateral and multilateral channels with direct benefit to host countries and communities as well as to refugees. So this is like NGOs working directly on the ground. Things, again, I'm going to say it's like people like George Soros and the Syrian White Helmets, right? These people can just start up an NGO and then ask for government money through the UN. You and I have very small political power when compared with something like that. And our country is leading the way and saying you guys should sign this. And they're very upset. Trudeau's very upset that countries are pulling out. But this is a poorly written document. And we're going to get to why countries are pulling out in just a minute. We're almost done this. We're getting close to sovereignty. Actually, I think we're at sovereignty. So, sovereignty. Trump is not a part of the UN migrant pact. And here he is talking about that. And link is in the description and why well, he'll explain it.
We recognize the right of every nation in this room to set its own immigration policy in accordance with its national interests, just as we ask other countries to respect our own right to do the same, which we are doing. That is one reason the United States will not participate in the new global compact on migration. Migration should not be governed by an international body unaccountable to our own citizens. Ultimately, the only long-term solution to the migration crisis is to help people build more hopeful futures in their home countries. Make their countries great again.
Wonderful, Mr. President. I love it. And really, seriously, I have nothing but respect for Donald Trump. He tells it like it is, in my opinion, and is unapologetic. Fantastic. Here's Hungary's migration. He's being interviewed by, I don't know who this person is, but they're talking about why Hungary is refusing to agree to the pact. It's the same reason.
Announced that it will pull out of the talks of the United Nations Migration Pact. What problem do you have exactly with the UN Migration Pact?
This document remained a very biased and unbalanced document in a way that it tries to portray migration as something good by definition and as a fundamental human right, which it is not. And it only concentrates on the rights of migrants instead of concentrating on the rights of people generally, as it is being written in the compact.
Well, it's a non-binding agreement, right?
Whenever a compact is being approved by the United Nations, you can be sure that it's going to be a point of reference when it comes to judgments, when it comes to jurisdiction, when it comes to rulings of the court, be it international or domestic. So it's not that simple to say that it's legally non-binding.
The Austrian.
Okay, and I'll leave it there. Again, link will be in the description. It's very interesting. This matters until we pull out of it. And if we pull out of it when other countries are in it, then we will lose international standing with international criminal courts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Australia is pulling out too, and I tried to find video, but I couldn't. It says, quote, UN Migration Pact, a threat to sovereignty. Australia's negotiators repeatedly warned officials who drew up a UN pact on migration they were adopting requirements that threaten national sovereignty. They were also warned that the global compact on migration contained ill-considered policies that would endanger lives and risked giving legitimacy to, quote, unsafe, disorderly, and irregular migration. Link is in the description. Feel free to read it. That's 3 countries that are getting out of Dodge. And this whole document so far has been telling us how expensive this is. And I clicked on this headline earlier, but the headline is, quote, Canadian voters should be concerned about government's deficit spending. If you don't know what deficit spending is, it's like you owe $60 on your credit card, and then you go out and spend $1,000 on your credit card. And then you get the $1,000 bill, and you have to pay like $200, right? So you go to the payday loan and you get the payday loan, you pay the $200, and then you spend $4,000 on your credit card. That's what our government is doing. And that's what our government is doing over and over right now. That's how our government is spending. And we don't have the money. Like, we just don't have the money. It's very simple. So signing on to this pact is going to chain us to all of those costs that we've been talking about, and to get a supposed economic benefit somewhere down the line, but I'm not sure exactly where down the line. It seems kind of, like they're lying about it, actually, is what it seems like. So I'm not sure it's worth it in the long run to continue believing these lies. Okay, so we're back looking at paragraph 40, 41, and 42, and these all 3 have concerns for me for sovereignty, for political power and activism, and for cost. Like, it's expensive, and giving groups power like this is just dangerous. So number 40 says, in recognition of their important work for refugees as well as host states, communities, and in support of partnerships, civil society organizations, including those that are led by refugees, women, youth, or persons with disabilities, and those operating at the local and national levels will contribute to assessing community strengths and needs, inclusive and accessible planning and program implementation and capacity development as applicable. 41, faith-based actors could support the planning and delivery of arrangements to assist refugees and host communities, including in the areas of conflict preservation, reconciliation, and peace building, as well as other relevant areas. And 42, public-private partnership will be explored in full respect of the humanitarian principles, including possible new institutional arrangements and methodologies for the creation of commercial business venture conditions and financial business instruments to support refugees and host community employment and labor mobility, and to enable greater opportunities for private sector investment. So, problems with, all of that sounds really flowery until those policies are brought into play. And here's an example of that from the Toronto Sun. Mr. Lilly posting, imagine a government that says we should use taxpayer dollars to ensure small businesses hire immigrants over Canadian citizens. Actually, in Justin Trudeau's Canada, you don't have to imagine that. A government report, when originating from the PM's own department, is calling for government grants to be used to incentivize small businesses to hire immigrants. A policy paper called, quote, Feminist Government calls for small and medium-sized businesses to partner with governments to help immigrants get a job using what they call a social impact bond. The idea comes from division of the Privy Council office, which reports directly to Trudeau. Unlike other job grant programs, this one seeks to have a small and medium-sized businesses become social service agencies that work with government in a very complex scheme. I don't know if you know anything about small businesses, but all of that sounds awful to anybody who knows anything about a small business. You want me to administer a social service agency that you are going to monitor me and monitor my job, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, they're well, here it is. Quote, under the social impact bond model, the government and employers would with input from stakeholders, including job agencies, would first agree on the specifics of what outcome for an initial hire or job laddering would look like. Job laddering is moving from like promotion. So they're being incentivized to promote people. So if you say you get $12 an hour, like that's your pay, or let's say $15 an hour. And from that $15 an hour, the employer only had to pay 10. Or 7, right? Because the government's kicking in 7. That's how this kind of incentive works. So if you can have a Canadian citizen, but you have to pay them $15 or $17 an hour, or you can have an immigrant and pay them $17 an hour. But if you are paying them $17 an hour, the business itself is only paying them $12 an hour. That's how the incentives used to work under Harper. Under this kooky scheme, it's just a ridiculous convolution of money moving around, which is exactly what the Liberals want. But this is what those policies in action look like. See? And they don't benefit the host countries at all. Not at all. The citizens of the host country are powerless to stop it unless you have a faith-based group that can organize, which there are some people out there that do. There are a lot of Christian communities out there that do. But more often than not, if you are a refugee, you've connected with a group of highly mobilized individuals who are willing to go out and protest and who are being paid by Canadian taxpayers to not be at work. So, incentivizing behavior results in the behavior. It just does. Okay, we're back to costs a little bit because I forgot that I got a little turned around, but paragraph 44 says, recognizing that the important role that sports and cultural activities can play in social development, inclusion, cohesion, and well-being, particularly for refugee children, both boys and girls, adolescent and youth, as well as older persons and persons with disabilities, partnerships will be pursued to increase access to sporting and cultural facilities and activities in refugee hosting areas. So, in addition to providing sensitive foods for everybody and all of that other fun stuff, we get to have cultural and sporting facilities for refugees. How much does that cost? Here we are, paragraph 68, and remember when I said earlier that educating children was 1/4 of the cost of refugees, and that was in the United States, so we're not even talking about Canadian costs. Canadian costs is a lot higher. We're putting them up in hotels. But here's what this compact says on education. Now remember, if we sign this, we're agreeing to do this. And under Justin Trudeau, who is desperately chasing a UN Security Council seat, he's going to take this to, I mean, he's exploited our own laws that hopefully, or that do explicitly prevent certain things that he's done. And that hasn't deterred him at all. So, I mean, what are you going to do? Anyway, paragraph 68 says, quote, in line with the national education laws, policies, and planning, and in support of host countries, states and relevant stakeholders will contribute resources and expertise to expand and enhance the quality and inclusiveness of national education systems to facilitate access by refugees and host community children, both boys and girls, adolescent and youth, to primary, secondary, and tertiary education. More direct financial support and special efforts will be mobilized to minimize the time refugee boys and girls spend out of education, ideally a maximum of 3 months after arrival. So they're committing to getting boys and girls into education 3 months after arrival. And I'm not saying that boys and girls don't need education. What I am saying is it's very expensive. How much does it cost? Paragraph 69 says, depending on the context, additional support could be contributed to expand educational facilities, including for early childhood development, technical and vocational training, and teaching capacities, including support for as appropriate refugees and members of host communities who are or could be engaged as teachers in line with national laws and policies. Additional areas for support include efforts to meet the specific education needs of refugees, including through, quote, safe schools and innovative methods such as online education, and overcome obstacles to their enrollment and attendance, including through flexible certified learning programs, especially for girls, as well as persons with disabilities and psychosocial trauma. So they're saying that not only should we get them in there, we should get them degrees, and if they can't get degrees, we should get them special help and modify the degree that they can possibly get, push them through the education process as fast as possible, and then get them in that job laddering program quick. Number 70. Jobs and Livelihood says, to foster economic growth for host communities and refugees in support of host countries and subject to relevant national laws and policies, state and relevant stakeholders will contribute resources and expertise to promote economic opportunities, decent work, job creation, entrepreneurship programs for host community members and refugees, including women, young adults, older persons, and persons with disabilities. And I think that it's funny, and this is why I brought these pictures up. They keep talking about these young women, these children, these old people who are the refugees. And man, where are they? Could you point them out? Where are they? Because that looks like a fighting age men to me. Looks like fighting age men to me. So what is this, UN? Like, is this a... What is this? Because it looks like we're spending a whole lot of money to have a whole lot of meetings about bringing a whole lot of fighting age men into Western countries. That's what it looks like. And it looks like you guys are either trying to tell us that it costs a lot of money or shame us into thinking that not accepting these people is throwing away $63 billion. Crazy. We've got one more category, guys. If you're still here, thanks for sticking with me. I'm going to get a drink and we're going to come back and talk about safety. Okay, so the last two paragraphs here, paragraph 56 and 57. 56 says, and it's safety and security, 1.3. So 56 says, security considerations and international protections are complementary. The primary responsibility for safety and security lies with states, which can benefit from the promotion of national integrated approaches that protect refugees and their human rights while safeguarding national security. So it says the legitimate security concerns of host states are fully recognized, as well as the importance of upholding the civil and humanitarian character of international protection and applicable international law, both in emergency and protracted situations. So they're giving lip service to, yeah, we understand there's problems here. And then 57 says, at the request of concerned states, blah, 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 support will be provided for capacity developed of relative authorities, for instance, on international refugee protection and exclusion criteria, strengthening of international efforts to prevent and combat sexual and gender-based violence, as well as trafficking and smuggling in persons, capacity development for community-oriented policing and access to justice, and the identification and separation of fighters and combatants at border entry points, or as early as possible after arrival, in line with relevant protection and safeguards. So these these policies are trying to protect people, or they're saying they're trying to protect people, but opening up your borders has the opposite effect. This is a Washington Times article, and it says the other open borders commodity. It says, some proponents of the current open border policy also claim to be defenders of women's rights. It is therefore supremely ironic that one unintended consequence of open borders is a substantial spike in sex trafficking of young girls. That's the major takeaway of a trip to South Texas earlier this month. Through the good office of longtime Texas Republican official and Reagan appointee, as well as high school classmate who's a rancher in southern Texas, she's just saying she met with deputies, etc. Hold on, I'll get to the relevant part. Sorry, this one wouldn't let me highlight. That's why it wasn't highlighted. Okay, so it said, my initial mission was to discuss the heroin epidemic from China and Mexico sweeping the United States. And they were more than willing to discuss drugs, but in each case, they voluntarily shifted into a discussion of the sex trafficking of young girls. It was clear, both from their words and their body language, that they are highly offended by this practice and wish more official attention were paid to it. One of the country's officials told me that this recent story. Border officials stopped a car. Training and instinct told them the driver was, quote, dirty, but they didn't know why. The K-9 team checked the car. Nothing. Agents tried to find hollows built into the car, searched, but found no drugs, no drug money, no stolen guns. Then one of the officers had an inspiration. Quote, the contraband was right in front of us. It was the 13-year-old girl sitting in the seat beside him. So link is in the description. Here's another one from CBC. Anyone can be a victim. Canadian high school girls being lured into the sex trade. And if you read this one, it's talking about how they use Instagram and Facebook and all that other stuff to show off their high life, right? Like they've got cars and money and all this stuff. And they start talking to these girls, they DM these girls, and if you're a sex trafficker, you're going to have a lot of money. So you're going to be able to actually legitimately prove that, have all this money, or send a lavish gift, or send an Amazon or an Amazon gift card or whatever. I mean, somebody who is 18 and under is not hard to impress. It doesn't take a lot of money to impress them. $1,000 sounds like a lot of money to a young person, and it could change their life. And I mean, it probably would change their life, and not the way they expect. So dressing up policies that open up borders and then say, yeah, but you guys check it out, make sure, and giving lip service to these things is not actually taking these things seriously. In the same way that giving lip service to all of these costs. We're going to meet every 4 years, and we're going to have these ministerial positions, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and everybody's going to pledge all this stuff. Well, guys, every single country in the world has domestic problems, and if Canada's any indication, and I think right now we're an outlier because we have an idiot running things, but they're not being handled. They in favor of helping these poor refugees. All of these articles blaming Europe for the rising tide of deaths for migrants. And it's all designed to, like, this guy's standing, right? I don't know if you guys have seen the videos of how they staged these photos, but this is like, come on. Oh no, this guy's standing. Come on. So all of these articles are designed to tug on your heartstrings and make you think that it is the morally right thing to do to help these poor refugees, right? I was saying, where are the children? Oh, they're front and center on the propaganda websites, because that's what this is. It's propaganda to turn your feelings towards support for these refugees. It's the same as this. Trump, that idiot, is saying that it would cost less to help refugees in their home region. I mean, simple math tells you that he's right. Like, if you thought about it for 10 seconds, of course he's right. Of course he is. Like, it makes absolutely no sense. It costs a lot of money to live in the United States, by factors of 10 easily, right? I mean, what kind of insane person thinks that you can get more bang for your buck by bringing people to the United States? And that's the people that are writing these documents. That's the people that are purporting to lead us. It's insane, and this document's not loading right now, so it's a good thing I was done. But my goodness, the problems inherent with the Global Pact on migration have already run 3 countries out of the pact. And if Canada continues on the path to signing it, I think we're in a lot of trouble. We're in a lot of trouble anyway, whether we sign it or not. But if this path is going to continue, then the Canada that I grew up in, it just won't be possible anymore. And that's sad. And you know, man, what a time to be alive. So thank you for watching my video. I hope I didn't get too far off track. And peoplespartyofcanada.ca, faithfortoronto.ca. Have a wonderful evening. And yeah, thanks for watching.